just waiting for you to do.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the Brooklyn Fishing Club podcast. Tonight we have a very special guest joining us who goes by the name of Doc Muller. He's one of the most renowned surf fishermen to ever fish the Northeast and has 12 books published. Tonight we'll be talking about how he achieved success as an angler, stories from the surf, and more. So thanks for joining us, Doc. We appreciate you coming on the show today to talk about fishing with us.
My pleasure.
What would you say your earliest memory of fishing is?
Well, that's kind of hard. There are a lot of them, but let me take the one that was really left an impression on me as a person and as a visual in my brain. When I was young, I was a kid, we used to go out and visit friends in Mattatuck. And usually somewhere on Memorial Day and then sometime during the summer. In fact, later on when I got older, I used to stay with them for a week every summer. And they were kind of my second mother and father, my friend's mother and father, and my second mother and father. Anyway, we went out one Memorial Day weekend, and my father and my friend's father said, okay, we're going to wake you up at dawn. We're going to go week fishing. Well, I'm all excited about that. It's 1948, by the way. And, they wake us up at dawn, and it's 34 degrees, blowing out of the northwest like a banshee. We bundled up. Needless to say, we couldn't go out in the bay, so we anchored up in the mouth of the creek, and my friend's father started chumming with grass shrimp. And those days, one of the ways you did this on the tide was you put a few grass shrimp on a hook, you suspended it from a float, and you let it drift with the current. And you would intercept what we used to call then tide runners. But they were big weak fish, adult weak fish, moving into spawn. Well, at one point, I'm totally frozen, but I look over the side of the boat, and in this crisp sunshine, what do I see but a river of weak fish passing under the boat? And that was we didn't catch any up to much weight, but it made a real impression on me, and I just see it in my mind to this day, all the colors, how weakfish are yellow and a little pinkish and silvery and all those colors. So that was most memorable, if not the most memorable.
That sounds amazing. So is fishing something that you did all throughout your childhood?
Yes. My father took me fishing, freshwater fishing, flounder fishing, took me on party boats out of Captree. We would go fishing in the Peconics with these family friends. So, yeah, I guess first time I ever went, maybe I was 5, something like that.
When did you start to feel like you were getting obsessed with the sport?
Immediately.
Did you ever feel like it was starting to become a problem?
No. It's not that kind of an addiction. It's just I love other things too. People, gardening, photography. So it's that kind of thing, but one of the most important things.
So speaking of it as something that, someone can get really, really into, what's the longest continuous amount of time that you've stayed out in the surf fishing for?
In the 90s, when the bass came back, in June, we had a run of fish on the North Shore on sand deals, the likes of which we haven't seen since. And I got there before sunset, and I was still there after sunrise.
Wow.
But I was younger. That could never happen now.
So what were some sacrifices that you made along the way to go from being just a good fisherman to known as a great one?
Well, I think the first thing I had to do, first of all, you need to understand this. Because of all my academic involvement, I didn't have a lot of time to fish until, actually after graduate school. And by then I was in my 30s because it took up so much time. that I would sneak an hour here, an hour there. And there was no pretense of being excellent at it at all. But one of the promises I made to myself was once I got the PhD, got the college job, I was going to make some changes in my life. One of them was to gradually wean, when the grants were done, wean off research. And it's replaced that, some of that time with surf fishing, and another part of that time with various kinds of being proactive in community work. So I really didn't even think about it until I was in my 30s. And that's when I realized, yeah, you got to do things. You got to work hard. I also had to accept the fact, and this is very important, if somebody wants to be better than they are, and they were taught by somebody they love. So I was taught by my father and this man who I refer to as my second father, and I called him Uncle John. And they were good fishermen, but they weren't great fishermen. And that's not a knock on them, because back in those days, you didn't have to be great. There was so many more fish. Young people have no idea how many fish there were of all species back then. So at that point, that's when I realized, number one, I'd have to, without disrespecting my father or my Uncle John, I had to just accept the fact that they taught me some wrong things, and they didn't teach me enough to really become better. The second thing I had to do was put my own time in. When I did this, there were no videos, there were no podcasts, there were precious few books. You had to do it on your own. And so I knew it would take a lot of time. I knew it would take a lot of dedication, a lot of focus. But I had to balance that, of course, against family and work and things like that. So I knew I'd have to make those kinds of sacrifices. I knew I also was going to have to, getting ahead of myself, because to do that, I wrote a letter to Frank Keating, who was the sports outdoor editor of the Long Island Press. And I said to him, I have time now, and I really want to become a better surf fisherman. You have any ideas? What do I do? And he was so nice. He wrote me back a handwritten, beautiful letter saying, well, one of the things I can suggest to you is join a good surf fishing club. And here's a list. And I think there were 5 clubs on there. And with the numbers, call them up and talk to the people. And I did, one by one. And then they invited me to come down just to to meet the guys and see what was going on. And one of the clubs was High Hill. And they had a lot of people who were heavily involved in striped bass conservation, especially, and very heavy even then. This is the 70s, into catch and release. And I said, this is the one for me. And so I applied, and I was accepted. And I was with High Hill, oh my goodness, 27 years, I think. And if you join a club, you're going to have to do stuff. So that was a part of the sacrifice. And then the question was, how can I learn from these people? One of the best advice they give you about learning to be better at tennis is play against somebody better than you. And so I identified who the people, and there were a lot of people. I mean, Jack Freck was in there, Fred Schwab was in there, Bob Krause, Bob Rance, Willie Young. I mean, there were a hell of a lot of good fishermen, great fishermen in there. And circumstance had it that I started talking with Fred Schwab, and he started asking me about the North Shore, because in the precious time I used to have to fish, I didn't have a boat, couldn't afford a boat. So what I'd do is just run down. I lived on the North Shore, so I'd run down to the nearest North Shore beach, fish an hour or two, and come home and get on with the various things I had to do. I knew a little bit about the North Shore, and he wanted to know more about it. And I wanted to know more about the South Shore, so we made a pact. We'd show each other what we knew. And I watched him. In those days, I mean, these were my mentors, the people I just mentioned. But there was no formality to it. And so I'm your mentor, like I do now with members, new members who wish it in the traditional Surfcasters, where I'm a member now. And it was just, you fished with these guys and you watched them and you asked them questions sometimes. And that's how you learned. And it was, of course, very old school. And so that's really how I got to learn a great deal.
So would you say that some of the sacrifices you made helped to earn the respect of those guys that you looked up to, and in turn helped you become a better angler?
Yeah, once I learned all the old school rules, then you live by those old school rules and you gain their respect. I'll tell you a little short story, if I may.
Sure.
First time I went fishing with, and I don't think he would mind me using his name, but with Fred Schwab on the South Shore. We were fishing at night, of course. Those days we pretty much only fished at night. And there was some bass around in the 20s to low 30s. And now remember, I'm not where I am now. I'm just starting out in seriousness, okay? And I get this bass on, and my drag clicker goes crazy, of course. And he goes crazy because one of those old school rules was you take your clicker out so that nobody knows you got a fish on. So when the fish got close, there were people starting to wander down the beach, and he grabbed the leader and unhooked the fish, put it on the scale, told me to wait, released it, and then said, if you ever come fishing with me with that bleepity bleep drag clicker in there, I'm going to break the rod over your bleeping head. and I'm laughing because there's not, in those days, that's the way it was. You do that to a newcomer today, my God, they implode. I didn't implode. I mean, that's the way it was.
Yeah. What were some of the other rules?
You had to dress up like a Navy SEAL at night. Everything was dark navy blue or black. You don't tell people where you caught fish, unless it's somebody you trust and unless it's part of the inner circle. If somebody puts you into fish, you damn well better pay him back pretty soon. Things like that. You know, you're pretty close to the vest stuff. And there were a lot of clicks, and there still are clicks.
Yeah, tell me about it.
The clicks are necessary, and a lot of people who are upset about the clicks don't understand that. It couldn't function without them, because you can't be inclusive of everybody in the club, because you can't trust everybody in the club, because they have a different set of rules. And I'm not saying which are right or wrong. It's just that if people have different sets of rules about how to go about things, sooner or later, your program gets upset.
Yeah.
And you can only really get close and trust a handful of people. So they work best, and that's how you get the best reliable information. That's how you teach each other, help each other. So I don't think there's anything wrong with clicks, as long as people don't abuse it in terms of shutting people out completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who would you say made up your clique in that club?
Oh yeah, well, the people I mentioned before, it was mostly Schwab and Rance and Krause and me. We fished a lot together, and within a year or so, Bob Krause became my everyday fishing buddy, and that's important too if you're young and have the energy, because a lot of times we spoke every day, of course, and he'd call me up and say, okay, we're going to go here tonight, I'll meet you. And I'd say, I'm tired, Bob. And he'd say, come on, you got to get out there, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So whereas I might have sat home and done nothing, now I'm going fishing, and now we're many times catching fish and learning something new, and learning a new place, learning a new pattern, something like that. So it's great to have a fishing buddy who works as hard as you, a fishing buddy who's skillful, a a fishing buddy you can trust, a fishing buddy who communicates well. So those four people, but mostly, like I said, Bob Krause and I became every night fishermen together.
How would you guys shake off other surf fishermen that were trying to like follow you to your spots or see what you guys were doing?
Okay, well, there's a couple of ways, and then there's a story I'll tell you. But you very rarely see me walk right along the water's edge. I walk back by the dunes, not in the dunes, but walk by the dunes because I really don't. And it's not being antisocial. I'm there to fish. I don't, if there's no fish, stop fishing, talk before I go home. But if I'm there to fish, damn it, I'm going to fish. And I don't want to be rude, but I don't want to get in conversations. So I'll walk high near the dunes. I don't do much night fishing anymore because of my age. But back then, not only would we do that, but we were fishing an inlet with marsh grass, people would come in, we'd go stand in the marsh grass and get eaten up by mosquitoes. But one summer, we found bass, and they were good bass. They were anywhere from 15 to 40 pounds. And the summer is tough to put in fish that big in competition. And so along comes July, and we put in quite a few fish. And on the next moon in August, all of a sudden we hear this boat come chugging down the inlet, and it's got a big bright light on it. Okay, well that wasn't all that uncommon because in those days there was something called jackers. They had a big light in the front of their boat, and they had a spear, and they would spear fish and come along. But it became obvious that it was some friends from our fishing club, from High Hill. And they were screaming at the top of the lungs, "We know you're here! We know you're here! We're going to find you! Come out!" Of course, they didn't find us. We were buried in the weeds with the mosquitoes.
Oh my gosh. That actually leads well into this other question I have. What's the most bizarre thing that you've ever seen while fishing?
Most bizarre thing. What do you mean by bizarre exactly?
Just like something wild, something that you weren't expecting, like.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the weakfish run on the North Shore in the 70s, the weakfish were feeding on sand eels and squid, and after a while, they would draw in a lot of sharks. And so you had to be careful, especially at night, how far in the water you went. And I was married at the time. My wife and I went to a beach to fish where I was catching weakfish regularly, where we were catching weakfish regularly. And we walked down to this bar, and we're about to go in the water a little bit. Now, one of the things that guys did was they put fish on stringers. And I saw that this guy had a couple of weakfish on a stringer. And I said to my wife, I said, we're not going on there, because I knew about the sharks. And we walked away. I said, we'll get weakfish down here. There's another piece of structure. We'll get them over there. And other fishermen went out on this bar while we're fishing, and we're catching them down a ways, maybe 1,000 feet. And there's about 10 fishermen now on this bar, and all of a sudden, it was very much like a cartoon. It looked like a whole bunch of people were walking on water backwards because a couple of sharks swept the beach. And, when the guys saw them, they got very frightened, and a couple of these stringers of fish were grabbed, and guys were dragged off a little ways until the fish ripped from the stringer. But I guess that's pretty unexpected.
Wow. That's wild. Do you know what kind of sharks they were? Did
Brown
they see them?
sharks.
Brown sharks?
Brown
Yeah. Wow. What's the scariest situation that you've personally been in while on the water?
On the water or in the water? Surf fishing, you mean?
First in the water and then just on the water in general. In or on, whichever you want to go with.
Okay. We're fishing. I'm fishing in an inlet on the full moon with Fred Schwab, look behind me, and with the full moon, you can see it's light-colored, amber-colored sand. I look behind me, and it's all black. And I take another look, turn slightly, and it's a stingray. And I held up my rod to it, and it was 11 feet long and almost 11 feet wide.
Wow.
And I identified which was the head, which was the tail. And now, this is not going to eat me or anything, but it had to weigh close to 1,000 pounds. And if I spooked it and it hit me, knocked me down into the current, I'm dead.
Yeah.
My weight is still up in water, and you say goodbye to me. So I'm walking this way, and I'm screaming at Fred, and he's laughing because usually we throw a lot of stingrays, but they were the size of an end table or something, the biggest. But this thing, I don't know where it came from, but it was absolutely huge. And no sooner did I get past its tail and it spooked, and the commotion it made in the shallows was unbelievable. But he's still laughing. I said, "You shouldn't laugh. It wasn't funny."
Did he see
on
it, though?
the water?
Yeah.
What?
Did he see it? Did he get a look at it?
No, he didn't see it.
Oh, so he doesn't even know. He's just laughing at
No.
you.
I said, Fred, this wasn't one of the run-of-the-mills, and I wasn't afraid it was going to bite me or anything, but it could have run me over like a steamroller.
And he's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, right. On the water, when Jaws came out, we made an arrangement, the fishermen, with Charlie Nappy. It was Rich Rena Sr. and me. Go with Charlie Nappy out fishing for white sharks because he had seen one. And unfortunately, we get out to Montauk, and it was very, very windy, and the seas were very big. So we didn't go the first day. We slept over. And the next day was windy, too, but towards the afternoon, it calmed down a little bit, and there were two boats were going to go out. And we went out, got around the point. The other boat turned back, and we pounded out to the mud hole, I guess it is out there.
Yeah.
And it just got worse and worse. And thank God, the late Charlie Nappy was a great captain, because we had huge seas, following seas. We would go up on a wave, and the boat would turn sideways a little bit, and then he'd have to compensate over and over and over. Oh, and Jerry Kenny of the News was with us, too, on that trip. And I thought for sure we were going to die. But thanks to Charlie Nappy, it took forever to get in, but we got in one piece.
Wow.
That was pretty scary, too.
What was that time like when people were catching white sharks?
Well, they weren't all that common, so it was a big deal. You had what was his name?
Frank Mundus?
Yeah, with the Mickey Mouse ears. Yeah, he was nuts. He was catching them, but nobody else was really, because they weren't that abundant.
Really? Yeah.
They'd come by in June following the pilot whales, because the pilot whales would be calving, and they'd eat the pilot whale calves.
Mm.
And then they'd keep following them up north. Now we got a whole different deal. There weren't hardly any seals then, and now there's tons of seals. So the ball game has changed. There's more white sharks. I don't remember anybody telling me about pilot whales off Montauk in a long, long time. So there's more of them. So it's more of them is seen. I understand this summer the draggers were getting small ones, a lot of small ones.
Oh, wow.
Nets. Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah, that's pretty wild. So let's talk a little bit about your writing career. So
Okay.
Before we get into it, you have 10 books published, correct?
10 fishing books, yes.
And who would you say were some writers that inspired you?
Writers that inspired me.
Or even inspire you to this day? Like what do you enjoy reading,
Okay. Well, I don't read fishing books. And I don't think I ever did. I read pieces of them. But what you need to know is that since I was in love with fishing, I used to read magazines, Field and Stream, Sports Field. at 8 years old, I was catching these white perch. And I took some pictures, I wrote a little article, and I sent it into the editor of one of them. I don't remember which. 8 years old. And the editor was kind enough to send it back with a lovely letter encouraging me to write. But of course, the article was terrible. The pictures were terrible. But, I was 8 years old.
Yeah, come on.
But the fact that this editor took the time to be encouraging and to talk about things I might want to do to make my writing a little more interesting. She knew I was a kid. And so it was just a wonderful letter. And I guess that more than anything else inspired me to one day. Now remember, after that it was all academics, so there wasn't a lot of time. But it was in my head, I'm going to do this one day.
Yeah. And trying to think of I had another question that popped up when you were saying that. Yeah, writers that inspired you, and then it was
the editor inspired me.
Editors. The editors inspired you?
The editor who returned my
Oh
article.
yeah. I'm sorry. I blanked on this question I had. And we'll edit this.
Okay.
Here we go.
Yeah.
The same way you have like you came up with like a clique of fishermen, right? When you started,
I didn't do it. It just happens naturally.
Yeah, it chose you. They chose you. As a writer, is it like a solo thing for you? Or are there people that you bounce ideas off of? Like what is that process like for you?
Well, the writing itself is a lonely process. It's just you. But you do have editors, so you query them, you offer ideas on stories, and they sometimes will say, "Nah, I can't use that. I have one like that already," or "Yeah, I like this idea," or could you elaborate a little more? I'd like to know more details to see where it'll fit. Things like that. So there is always a give and take with editors, and the two I'm working with now are actually three. Dave Anderson at the
Surfcasters Journal.
Yeah. Fred Galafaro I spend most of my time with.
Fred's a great guy.
Yep, and then Jimmy C. On the Water, who's also. All three of them are terrific.
Shout out to all three of them. They're all great
Absolutely.
guys. And
Absolutely.
I send my articles to Jimmy for On the Water for the New York Metro column, often 2 weeks late. So, Jimmy, if you're listening, thank you for not replacing me yet.
That's a no-no,
I know, but we make it.
You know how many articles I've been commissioned for? I've been commissioned to write because somebody else failed their deadline.
Oh man, that's only happened to me once, but we're not going to talk about that much more. not tonight. But
no, I had to learn. Oh, I know who else inspired me. By the way,
yeah,
yes. Because when I got the degree, got into college teaching and research, I wrote some articles and sent them up to Frank Woolner at the Saltwater Sportsman. And Frank, he was a hard-nosed guy, but man, was he a wonderful guy. And I'd send up articles, and he would instead of rejecting them, he would send them back with corrections and encouragement and how I needed to get better in order to communicate what I wanted to do. So I owe not very late, died a long time ago, but I owe Frank Woolner a lot because he was very, very patient and taught me a hell of a lot. So shout out to him wherever he is.
Yeah.
And then I started sending things. Once when I got a few accepted by Saltwater Sportsman, I sent them to Glenn Voparel at the Fisherman. He was the editor then, and he was also very helpful and very kind, and they encouraged me, and they, in that sense, were inspirational.
That's really cool. This is one question I've been asking since I kind of started interviewing people about fishing even before the club, and that is, do you have any superstitions? And if so, what are they?
I'm not a superstitious person. I'm really not. But, and I don't know if this qualifies as a superstition, but I believe there are two fish which are the hardest to catch on any outing. You know which they are?
I don't.
Not species.
I don't.
Any idea?
No.
The 1st and the 14th.
That's a really good one.
And it's silly,
No,
but I can't tell you how many times I've caught the 13th and then not caught the 14th for a long time. And then caught 14, 15, 16, 17, and so on. Bump, 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 bump. So that's where they came from. Experience. Personal experience.
So you've got your own personal superstitions. So
yeah, well, it's not quite a superstition.
It's not like no bananas on the boat. Do you believe in that?
Oh
one?
no, it's nonsense. There have been fishermen go on their boats and they kick me off because I got a banana. It's nonsense.
Do you believe in the fish gods?
No.
No.
I believe in nature.
That's great, man. That's great.
In fact, the places where I fish that nobody else fishes, and I call them my cathedrals.
I love that.
I do my best praying.
And what are the GPS numbers for those?
Lots of luck.
I'm just kidding. So let's talk a little bit about some of your most memorable catches from the surf. Let's talk about that 53-pound striper that you mentioned to me when we were speaking before the interview.
Right. Well, I was out with Fred Schwab, and nothing much was happening that night. And it was about 2 a.m, and I'm ready to go home. And I'm tired. I got to go to work the next morning, like we all did. Nobody took off then to go fishing. We all went to work. We never took off, and that's why we fished at night almost all the time. But I'm ready to go home. I go over to Fred and I say, "Nah, I've about had it." He says, "Yeah, me too." He says, 10 minutes. I said, all right, I'll hang with you and I'll walk with you to the vehicles. And I moved down a little bit and I made a cast and sank the hook into a fish, and it started stripping off line and landed it in the full moon, and it was huge, and put it on the scale, weighed it, etc. He witnessed it. And all of that was interesting because I was about to go home. Because of the weight of the fish, but to revive it, I had to, you first move it in the water a little bit. It started to come around. When it started to swim slowly, I straddled it like I was riding a horse, followed it up the beach, turned it around to go the other way, and in the moonlight, and that's another one of those visual things that's etched in my memory forever. And then after 5 minutes or so, she got really strong, and she took off like a shot. So I have that memory in the full moon.
That's amazing. How long would you estimate that it took to revive her?
I would say over 5 minutes.
Wow.
Of patience.
But
I knew she could make it because she wasn't bleeding, and she got to a point where she was upright. She could keep herself upright, but just moving slowly. So I didn't want her to go off into deep water, moving slowly. So by straddling her, every time she made a move that way, I kept her in the shallows.
Yeah.
I figured if she was strong enough to push me out of the way or zoom away, then she'd be fine. But I wanted to keep her there like a watcher for a while. And like I said, dorsal fin came up. She got really taut, the muscles, and then all of a sudden, boom, bolted. So all good.
Would you say that the best moment of catching like a very memorable fish like that, like one that you've been chasing for a while, a giant, would you say, just personally, your favorite part of like the whole battle would be the beginning where you first hook up with it and you know that it's a giant, or the end where you get to see it swim off?
Well, I think there's two parts to that answer. Everybody lives for the hit. I do anyway, but a lot of fishermen I've talked to, the hit is much more important than the fight. So I would have to say, being able to fool a fish one that's time and has gained hopefully some smarts. That's satisfying, and that instant connection to nature is satisfying. But then to be able to release it, to be able to know that maybe it will, maybe it won't spawn again, maybe nobody will catch it for a while. I wish people who kill fish without thinking would think a little bit. Do I really want this fish? Do I really need this fish? And can I gain a joyful experience by releasing it properly? And I don't mean the illegal ones. I mean the legal ones. As you can see from that story in the moonlight, it's special.
Yeah. Do you think there's not enough people that are following that practice these days?
Well, let me tell you a little story. My son has a boat. We fish from the boat, mostly bottom fishing. But a couple of weeks back, when the weather was still nice, two Sundays in a row, we went out and we got into some nice sea bass and big porgies, and then another weekend some blackfish also. Me and my two sons and I, we kept 3 fish: a sea bass for me, a sea bass for one son, and a blackfish for the other. I go over to the table to clean them, and there's this guy cleaning a huge striped bass, a huge bluefish, a whole bunch of however many legal blackfish, however many legal sea bass. The next week, there he is again with the same thing. I didn't say anything, but my God, how many fish can you eat?
Yeah.
How about, you love this sport. How about thinking about next year and the year after that? How about thinking about your kids? How about thinking about your grandkids who might like to do this? So, like I said, I didn't say anything, but I think that's a little wasteful. Keep a fish to eat. I don't like frozen fish. I don't know how anybody can eat it.
Yeah.
I'll keep a fish. I kept the striped bass since 2010. But I'll keep a sea bass, a porgy, a fluke, a porgy.
So if there was
and I'm going to say to you, when the legal season comes to an end, if I happen to catch a 30-inch bass, it's coming home, because I love holiday striped bass chowder, and if all that comes together, and it'll be the first one since 2010.
Wow. What advice would you give to people who are kind of like fishing all the time? There's a lot of people I know that, especially now with stripers and the way things are with the striped bass population and all the issues surrounding them. There are people I know that like to catch them and eat them and take them, for the table. They only get so much time to fish. They'll go out on a boat. If they get a bass, they're taking it, but a lot of people only see the end result of that boat trip, and they'll see 6 guys holding up 6 bass and, make a judgment that, those 6 bass just got killed for nothing. And then we have other people in the club who are all about, pro catch and release and, let them go, let them grow. And I don't know, what advice would you actually give me? Because I'm actually stuck kind of in the middle of both sides of it, because we have both parties of people in the club and people that, let fish go, but will also keep a fish. And it's like, I don't know, things have gotten so tense with the striped bass argument. I don't even know what to say anymore,
Well, first of all, I think what we do should apply to all species of fish, not just striped bass.
Yeah.
Second of all, I'm a kind of guy who's in the middle.
Yep.
I see fish hogs, and I think that's wrong. And they wind up in dumpsters, and they wind up being given away to neighbors, which I think is wrong in this day and age. That was fine in the 50s and 60s, but it's wrong now because our populations have declined so much. Let them catch their own fish or buy them at the supermarket where they're dead.
Yeah.
Already. Like this guy at the cleaning table, they're fish hogs. They're 2 guys. What are you going to do with them? And I listen to them talk, and they're giving them away to their neighbors. I'm not for that. On the other hand, I'm not saying, as you heard, I keep a fish here and there, and I see nothing wrong with that if you enjoy eating them. I don't understand people killing 40 and 50-pound bass because they're not all that good to eat.
Yeah.
The best fish is 20. Now you have no choice next year. You know, if I'm going to save a fish, it's going to be somewhere at 29, 30, 31, 32 inches. That's it. They're best to eat. They have the fewest parasites. The flesh is usually, real white and firm. You can do anything you want with it.
Yeah, but I mean,
I don't see the point of killing all the big fish like they do.
But what do you say to the guy, who works
I don't say anything
all month, right? He works all month, and he gets one shot to go out, and it ends up being a big one. How does he?
I say, if you're within the law, I say nothing to you.
Yeah, I know.
But
nowadays, nobody's even like the law is like it's like who's even coming up with this stuff? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The law is one thing, but what I feel inside is generally better fishermen, really, really good fishermen, who've been doing it a long time, they become sportsmen.
Yeah.
They become good stewards of the sea. Guys where it's about ego, they're the hogs. But I think if you catch one, it's legal, do with it what you want.
Do you think there's more ego involved nowadays with, social media and everything? And
yeah, much more.
Instantly able to share a picture whenever you catch a fish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Much more ego involved today. We've had a great run of small fish along the South Shore. There've been a few big ones. I had a big one, but there's not many. It's mostly fish from 20 to 26, 27 inches. And people say, friends, how do you do? I said, I had a good time, had a good day. All small, right? As if they don't count. They do count. They're fun. And these are husky schoolies, and they can put up a stink unless you're using, meat tackle.
Yeah.
If you're using modern, I use a 9-foot medium-powered blank and a Von Stahl 200 on it, and they put up a good stink. Enjoy it. You're connected with nature.
Yeah.
Big fish snobs bother me. I mean, I caught a lot of big fish in my day, but I was never a big fish snob where it was them or nothing.
Yeah.
I want to catch fish. I go in the winter. I when there's no saltwater fish around, I go to lakes and streams and catch bluegills, for goodness sake, because I want to catch fish. It's a privilege to catch a fish.
I agree. The last question I'm going to ask you before we have to go is, considering that you figured out a way, right, to make a living, full-time living off fishing, which nowadays I feel like there's a lot of people trying to do it, especially with YouTube, social media. You got a different fishing clothing brand popping up every other day. How what advice would you give to people coming up that genuinely would love to make a living off of fishing? Like, what is the best piece of advice you could give them?
Don't do it. Look, the stocks are declining. The regulations are therefore becoming stricter. You have social media that takes away a lot of edge from things like captains, from people like captains. There is a lot of competition, not only from fishermen who want to make a business with clothing and gear and tackle and whatever, but from big companies. If people knew, the Berkeley people, the parent company is, I forget. Anyway, it's a whole conglomerate of products that includes Berkeley, which is the best known of those products. If people knew how much they grossed a year, a huge company like that, they'd be shocked. It's not that much.
Yeah.
It's hard, and they focus mostly on freshwater, which is 80% of fishing in America. So if they knew that, they understood that, it's really not a good idea. Look how many bait and tackle dealers have closed their doors. in the last 10, 15 years. It's not a good idea, but if it's your passion, then be prepared to work very, very hard and very, very smart.
That's good. What's the smartest way to do it?
The smartest way to do it is not to get carried away with dreams. Have your dream, but don't let it influence your decisions. You got to sit down with pen and pencil or a computer or whatever it is and come up with the right way, the best way to do it. If you get consumed with dreamland, you're going to spend money, never get it back, and fail.
That's good advice. There's so many people who would love to make a living off this, and they see people doing it, right? And they see the end product. They'll see like a 2-minute YouTube video, right, of somebody catching a big fish, but they don't see the hours, possibly days that went into that person getting that footage. Like everybody just sees the end result, and
that's the hard work part.
Yeah,
of it,
they don't see the sacrifice. So, I don't know.
Well, it's that way. Even if you don't make a living out of it. I mean, I competed. I still do, but not very, very seriously anymore because of my age. But in the heyday of my competition, you can't just decide you're going to compete and then fall apart when you don't win. To win takes a tremendous amount of time and effort and smart thinking and planning and attention to detail. Tremendous amount. And the people that do that and have a certain amount of athleticism, they win. But to dream about it and then just be upset when it doesn't happen. I mean, you want to hear a story about competition?
Yeah.
Okay. What the heck was it? It was in the 1990s, I think. Fred Schwab had moved. Bob Krause had some health issues. Bob Rance was, where was he? Moved to Florida, I think. So my old competitive buddies and my friends were gone. And I just didn't have that fire in the belly. So I started the season from a competitive point of view, very half-assed. And the guy in the club had a good month, and I never believed that you trash talk or put somebody down or diminish their accomplishments, because it doesn't cost you a damn thing to congratulate somebody and mean it. So at the club meeting, I congratulated him, and anyway, he went on this whole big 20-minute thing about when he makes up his mind to win, how he's going to win. Well, he always leaves sleeping dogs lie. And that 20-minute conversation, I didn't say a word to him, wished him luck, but on the way home, my belly was on fire again. And the next day I went out, and within a month I caught him, and within 2 months I was 200 points ahead of him, and at the end of the season I buried him. So leave sleeping dogs lie, will you? Don't have a big mouth. Everything, keep it to yourself. What you're doing, why you're doing it, what your motivation is. Don't trash talk people. And that's the same way in business. If you start bragging about, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, you talk too much, somebody's going to steal your idea and do it faster and better than you.
That's true. So, very true.
You got to be smart. And you got to have the fire in the belly, but you also have to be logical and real about it.
Yeah. So that was just one tournament you won? Would you say
no,
that?
that was part of the season-long thing.
Yeah.
Surf ball in High Hill, as all clubs, there's a competition within the club.
Yep.
So not only inter-club, but intra-club competition. So this was intra-club competition. And because it takes a lot more than people think to do that.
Yeah.
Wishing is not enough.
Were there ever any moments where, what were some challenging moments where, let's say you went out and, didn't perform as well as you thought you could, and any moments of self-doubt along the way where you really questioned what you were doing?
Well, those are two separate questions. Was there any self-doubt? Never. Were there humbling moments? Absolutely. very humbling moments, many, 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 many. But you can take them two ways. You can be negatively affected by them, or you can use them as motivation and as a learning experience. And that's what the second was always my choice.
That's great. I think on that note, we're going to wrap it up.
Okay.
And I think it went really well.
Okay. I hope I didn't get too passionate at times.
No, too passionate. This we're all about the passion over here on the Brooklyn Fishing Club podcast.
Okay.
So all I can say is thank you so much for being a guest on our show, and we appreciate our listeners. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks with another guest on the Brooklyn Fishing Club podcast.